you beautiful people. I hope you're all doing good. I It's always good to see you guys. So I just wanted to start off the stream by saying, what do you guys want to see? What do you guys want to see? Is there anything in particular? I've been wanting to do a Let's Endure. So is there a particular Let's Endure you guys want? One I've been thinking about doing, and I was just the only reason I hesitate is because it's really old. Was the Let's Endure of Krauts RK selection theory video, just because I've been reading a lot about animals and I thought it might be kind of cool to talk about that. Um, I'm trying to think. There's like some other stuff maybe, but that's kind of what I had in mind. If people could just post in the chat what they'd like me to do in Endure of. And keep in mind, Endure isn't just like we'll watch it. I'll have like all kinds of commentary and insights and stuff like that. And we'll just have a good time and hang out. Because I'm doing this instead of, I don't know, doing something more productive with my life. Some days after a really long day of work, you just need to chill off stream and beg for money. So it's taxes are coming up in Canada. So if you guys want to give me some money, then I can pay my bills for this time. Let's see here. Endure slash stream of your choice. So yeah, people can just tell me what they want to see or what they want me to do. So I'm just gonna pull the chat. Kraut might be a good start until someone comes up with something. Are people interested in that? Because I'm fine doing that. I only hesitate because it's old. You know what? We're just gonna do that. This is my stream, and I can just do whatever I want. Okay, so did Kraut take it down though? That's the only issue. Um, did Kraut and T take it down? Uh. Too dumb for science. Yeah, I don't know. Does anybody have something that you guys want me to do? This is a fucking great stream. This is the king of streams. I don't watch Crow. What did he do it on? Let's see. It's not a complex idea. What a goofy. Okay, so Straylock is saying it's an old meme. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find it because I'm not sure if he still has it up. If he still has it up, we'll just do that. Let's see here. Let's see. Genetics and physiology. Too dumb for genetics and math. For quantitative genetics. I'm trying to remember what it was. What's your opinion on the blackface in Virginia? Dog fart porn star interviews have potential. Okay. That is an interesting idea for a video. So let me see here. Let me see what I can find. Oh, okay. So Kraut does still have it up. Okay, so we'll do that then. Okay. So, okay. Let's see here. I'll have to edit this because this is fucking horrible. Is the stream starting? That's a good question. Is the stream starting soon? It's starting in a minute. I'm just... Okay. Okay, RK selection theory. Okay. There we go. So let me just rearrange my windows for a second, and then we will get started. I apologize for the shitty introduction. I do generally edit these. Like I'll edit the dead air at the beginning out. It just can take a little while. Okay, so that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let us begin. Okay. So this was Krauts' attempt to make a video on... Actually, you know what? Just to make it harder for him to whatever. Okay, so let's just start.
But reason and evidence...
Let me know if the audio balance is okay.
Just look at the skeptic community and their views on race and IQ.
I'm not a scientist, I'm not an anthropologist, etc. And I would so much prefer for actual scientists to talk about this stuff.
Race realism is kind of just common sense.
Thank you, because your lecture touched my genes, and I know the genes of everyone in here.
I'm just trying to understand the nature of reality. As a comment I read the other day pointed out, people confuse scientific findings with a political or social agenda.
RK select.
Yeah, but they are inherently related. And this is going to be something we'll see throughout this, and that's kind of what I wanted to do this video. It's you can't separate the two. You can't separate biological and cultural and like these things all evolve together. These all things are just fundamentally interrelated. And part of, and this is kind of a thesis I had. So the difference between reaction and neo-reaction is reactionary thought initially, I think, was kind of driven by nostalgia. It was nostalgia for an age that rapidly vanished. It was nostalgia for a time when, just prior to the French Revolution, prior to liberalism, that kind of thing. So it was kind of a direct continuity of the people with the old order versus the new order. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you have neo-reaction, and kind of how I view neo-reaction is it was kind of refining a lot of reactionary ideas, but it was embracing them not on the basis of nostalgia or kind of just tradition, but it was on the basis of trying to kind of come up with rational explanations for it, using science, etc. I kind of have a similar approach to politics. I like to call it political naturalism or something to that effect. But anyways, let's keep going.
Action theory, which relates originally to animal to mammalian life, but is also, it sheds interesting light on human dynamics.
But of course, they're all afraid of the...
So very briefly, what RK selection theory is it's this description of two different types of reproductive strategies. On one hand, you have a focus on having a couple high-quality offspring, and on the other, you have a focus on having a whole bunch of offspring that are somewhat lower quality. Now, there's all kinds of different aspects to this that aren't mutually exclusive. Parental involvement is normally part of K, but there's also high parental involvement. Oftentimes with R, the young are born being able to fend for themselves, but you also see this in like deer and cattle and that kind of thing with more K type animals. So there's a whole lot of different aspects to it. But generally speaking, the overall focus is more offspring that are lower quality and less energy and time is invested in them versus fewer offspring in which more time is invested with them. And it's kind of a spectrum. It's what we call a heuristic. So heuristic is something you have in social and biological sciences. So a heuristic is very similar to, I guess you could say, a symbol. So it's you say a term and it immediately conjures up a certain idea or a certain series of ideas, etc. Most terminology is kind of like that. Like democracy, memes are kind of like that. Like if you say the term democracy, for instance, that conjures up a whole bunch of different stuff. And these things are not exact, but they give you a general idea of the category. So let's just continue.
Losing their job, they're afraid of Antifa coming and murdering their family or whatever.
The people who deny race realism or the fact that IQ varies depending on race or background, they're just being timid PC pussies.
And broadly speaking, right wing is K-type and left wing is R-type.
No, well, that's just a massive oversimplification. Lots of a lot of urban liberals practice very K-type lifestyles. They might have like the one designer baby at the age of 30 and put them through like a billion different things. Whereas a lot of right-wing people are K-type. That is, they will have like 12 children, like traditional Catholics. R-type. A lot of like traditionalists will pursue a more R-type lifestyle. Varg is kind of like this. A lot of traditional Catholics are like this. It's having a whole bunch of children, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's a left versus right thing.
It might be a lot if we're talking about a group that seems naturally inclined to socialism like Hispanics do, but it's nothing.
Denial, obfuscate. And when they finally lose the debate, they say, well, but let's say that it's true. What does it matter?
Have you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Here's a little visualization. In summary, it states that the more a person spends talking about a topic that they know progressively less about, the more likely they are to make fools out of themselves. As a consequence of knowing progressively less
You would know,
about the
Kraut.
topic,
You would
I
know.
think this law very well applies here for the people that we are about to cover in this video. Around 2 months ago, I announced on Twitter that I would be looking deeper into alt-right claims of race realism, that I was seeking out the opinions of professionals in an attempt to first and foremost educate myself, and I succeeded by managing to get the attention and valuable help of a neurologist and a geneticist. One of them also happens to be on YouTube. I'm mentioning this because, funny enough, the alt-right reaction to that was to proclaim that asking biologists to explain biology is supposedly an appeal to authority fallacy. But far more importantly, because this video and upcoming videos would have been close to impossible without the dedication and help of that woman and man. Both.
Well, I mean, this is a very controversial issue, and this is kind of what we call in political science an essentially contested concept. The idea is, do experts have any kind of particular insight into something? Like, because somebody has studied something in length and they've gotten a credential, does that make their opinion inherently more valuable? And this is something you see a lot, because you have a lot of people who study things, but they're like completely retarded. I mean, look at like economists and how they run the economy, and it's often a complete shit show. So you'll have people who will spend like 30 years writing all this stuff, and they'll be completely wrong. The Soviet Union had massive numbers of geneticists who spent decades studying Lamarckian evolution, and it was a complete and total disaster. That's not to say I don't have a lot of respect for education and a lot of respect for other things. But I think on a certain level, if people apply themselves and they try to think about these things rationally, you're not ever going to be as good as a professional. But you can kind of try to get the broad concepts, etc. People come at things with their own biases. People come at things with their own way of looking at the world and their own way of thinking. And very often something that might be obvious to me is not obvious to someone else, and something that's obvious to someone else may not be obvious to me. So
Both of them having spent considerable time of their lives dedicated to their academic profession.
I'm not a scientist, I'm not an anthropologist, etc. And I would so much prefer for actual scientists to talk about this stuff. But of course, they're all afraid of losing their job, they're afraid of Antifa coming and murdering their family or whatever. So
another issue you have to keep in mind is a lot of academic disciplines are very narrow. So he says neurologist and geneticist, and you're like, oh, okay, this sounds interesting. But they might have, like, as a neurologist, they might have studied like some very specific type of electrotransmitters or brain chemicals. Like maybe they specialize in the impact of serotonin on neural processes. I'm not diminishing it. That's something I'd never be able to do. But they don't necessarily know what they're talking about. This is an issue you have a lot when we're talking about what's it called again? First century archaeology, when we're dealing with the Bible. A lot of the people who say like, oh, the Jesus didn't exist, that kind of thing, and they're like, oh, we have these historians who say that. They're like historians from another time period, and that's kind of an issue. And you'll say, oh, it's a professional historian, and the person probably knows a lot about their area of expertise, but they might not know anything about another area of expertise.
They don't feel that they're at liberty to actually talk about these topics. Even though the science is out there, the science has been done.
One of the first things the geneticist told me was that she had spent a considerable time of her career.
Remember what happened with Crick? Recently, I forget if it was Watson or Crick, but he said some controversial things, and they took away all of his money, they took away all of his academic awards, etc., because he said something a little unpolitically correct.
Doing research on genes that are resistant to genetically inherited diseases and that inhere words Schwachsinn, which means nonsense, such as race realism, is simply a waste of extremely valuable and precious time and resources in her profession. As much as some of you might be bored by this introduction, I feel obliged to doing it. This video and other projects in the works would have been impossible without these two people. I'm a mere high school dropout who may have gotten himself through night school into university, but I would not have the learning patience that it would require to study and succeed academically in the hard natural sciences such as chemistry, biology, and physics.
But, like, I don't think you really need to. Like, you can understand the general concepts without having to understand, like, what specific amino acids make up a gene, like ATCG or whatever. You don't necessarily need to know that in order to have an opinion on something.
Both of you have often not had the time to answer questions I had, because both of you were very busy with work in your academic field, and still both of you have found the time on occasion to patiently listen to my questions and to respond not only in detail, but in a way that gave a layman like me a good understanding of the matter. I would like to thank you with a deep felt sincerity and awe, not only at the end, but at the beginning of this video, for sacrificing some of your valuable time for me. I would like to thank the geneticist for actually even giving me one of her own books from her time as a student during the 1980s, so I could get a better understanding of the...
Wasn't the human genome only sequenced in like the early 2000s? Let me look this up. Okay, Human Genome Project. I thought that the human genome was only successfully sequenced. Yes, okay, it was completed in 2003. Actually, the head of the Human Genome Project is now a Christian, but that's neither here nor there. But, like, okay, so we're looking at things about evolutionary biology before really we had modern genetics. I mean, I guess you can look at the genetic code of other stuff, but...
Darwinian development of cognitive ability, a topic that we will be covering in a later video. And I would like to thank the neurologist for the calls in which you patiently explained to me matters that I often had little initial understanding of. A heartfelt and sincere thank you to both of you. Let us start with something simple, RK selection. It is one of the favorite topics of the alt-right and several far-right commentators. You will find many a video on the topic of RK selection from many, ranging from the conservative commentator Bill Whittle, a 3-hour series by Stefan Molyneux, a live stream by Tara McCarthy, the cringy buffoon Davis Arini
Oh, shout out to Arini.
made a video on this. Red Ice TV had a podcast with the laughing stock that is Matt Forney on the evolutionary psychology behind politics, and it's one of the favorite topics of the alt-right YouTuber Millennial Woes.
And I've made fun of him for this in the past. I think it's very cringy, the way that he handles RK. I'm going to be talking about it probably more in the context of biology, because I love animals. I don't talk about animals enough because I feel like I'm not super qualified. I love animals. I love reptiles, mammals.
I believe the
like
best
them.
way to illustrate what RK selection is with the translation of the German term for it, Fortpflanzungsstrategie, which means strategy of sexual reproduction, and with these graphs. Take a very good look at these graphs and their coordinate system. The x-axis represents percentage of maximum lifespan. The y-axis represents the number of surviving offspring. Within this graph, you will see 5 different strategies of reproduction, with there being 2 extremes, human beings and the thistle. Human beings are K-types, the thistle.
Are elephants really that much less K-type than humans? I guess so. I don't know. They are very... It's in general, I mean, it's not an absolute thing, but in general, humans, I think, are, I would say, the most K-type. You also have dogs are pretty K-type, particularly like wolves, because they have social units. I find in general anything that has a social unit tends to be more K-type.
Is an R-type. Human beings have few offspring, however their reproductive strategy includes considerable time for nurturing that offspring, thereby ensuring that the majority of that offspring survives. Thistles have a lot of offspring, however their reproductive strategy involves no nurturing by the parents, and with a strategy of safety in numbers, the majority of the offspring dies within a short time span. All species of animals can be found within these graphs, with the exception of sterile hybrids such as the mule, and those graphs are all trending.
The mule? What the hell's a mule? I don't know what a mule is.
Towards either one of those extremes, with bird species often finding themselves within the middle. The 2 different strategies of R-type and...
Interesting fact, and I found this out recently, birds are actually a type of reptile. Yeah, you wouldn't really think about it, but they're closer related to like crocodiles and lizards than lizards or crocodiles are to amphibians. So birds are actually a type of reptile, which is fascinating.
K-type in essence differentiate by R-type having the sexual reproductive strategy and sex organs for high quantity of offspring, with however no biological mechanism for nurturing, and K-types lacking the reproductive and sex organs for high quantity of offspring, in favor however of nurturing the offspring that they produce. Elephants lack reproductive and sex organs for plentiful offspring in a single pregnancy, however spend considerable time nurturing their offspring, hence K-type. Frogs have reproductive and sexual organs for plentiful offspring, however spend less time with nurturing that offspring, hence R-type. K-types require for their reproductive...
Turtles are an interesting case because turtles live a very, very long time, but I think they have quite a bit of offspring. So that's a very interesting... The animal kingdom is full of exceptions.
strategy to inherit organs and behavioral patterns that allow them to convert energy into that nurturing process. Wombs, pouches, milk production, possibly even socialization. A side effect is also that K-types give birth to offspring that is not fully mature and hence requires nurturing. It is important to note that this sexual reproductive strategy didn't evolve as a mere behavior by itself, but evolved as a necessity due to the sexual reproductive organs. R-types require no such thing. They lay eggs and nurture them until they hatch, albeit with the exception of some shark species that give birth to living young.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about. So I think it's something like a third of snakes. You know what? We're going to find a video because it's really cool. Let's see. Garter snake giving birth. Not pythons. Boas give birth. I think skinks all give live birth. But it's very common, actually, among reptiles. Now there's a couple different. Some have a pregnancy and like a placenta, like mammals do. Others will have, I think it's called ovariscus or something, in which they keep the eggs inside of their bodies, and the eggs hatch within inside of their bodies. Let's see here, giving birth. Let's see here. Let's see. I'm just trying to find a video of this. Okay, garter snake giving birth. Here we go. Yeah, there we go. See, fully formed snakes are coming out. Yeah, I really want to get a garter snake. Cool fact about garter snakes, this is partially just me talking about animals. Garter snakes are one of the few species of snake that you can keep together. You can keep large numbers of, you can keep multiple garter snakes together, and they actually seem to like each other. This is kind of a cool video from Snake Discovery where they had a litter of garter snakes. Yeah, so those all came out of a litter. They're adorable. I want to get a couple. I want to get like a pair of them maybe. So yeah, they give live birth. It was actually really interesting to find out that they give live birth because I had never really known that before. Some sharks do, it depends.
Young, but then still spend little to no time at all with their offspring. However, it is required that the offspring has the immediate inherited capacity to fend for itself and to survive by itself without nurture from its parents, and be an independent animal at birth in most examples. Black mambas and praying mantis, for example, would very well...
Okay, Anonymous says the problem with snake pets is having to feed them other living creatures. I mean, no, actually, what most people do with snakes is you get a bunch of rodents frozen, and you heat them up by putting them in a bowl of warm water, and then you can just give those to your snake. Cool thing is snakes you only have to feed like once a week or something because their metabolism's so slow. They're fascinating animals.
Well, cannibalize their own young after hatching. Hence, these two species are born capable of fending for themselves. In essence, the further you trend towards the extreme of the R-type, the more capable of fending for itself the offspring is required to be. As with the K-type, the R-type sexual...
No, that's not really true. In fact, let's think about this logically for a minute. Is like a puppy more capable of fending for itself, or is like a minnow when it's born? I don't know. I feel like K-type animals tend to be more fully formed in a lot of cases. R-type is just kind of a fire and forget thing.
Reproductive strategy didn't evolve as a behavior by itself, but evolved because of the evolved sexual reproductive organs that...
No, that's not how evolution works. So evolution is really cool. It's a bit like the a market economy. It's just something that kind of works. And it's interesting just to talk about religion for a second. When I kind of started looking at evolution, I looked at how it worked. It actually made me believe a lot more in God than I did before. Because it's such a fascinating just to see all the kinds of the beautiful, incredible creatures. Like I remember when I was watching Planet Earth, and I saw the waterfall fish. Let me just look up the waterfall fish because these. Oh no, let's look it up over here. So waterfall fish is probably like the coolest thing I've ever seen. Let's see. Where's the waterfall fish? The fish that live in waterfalls. And when I saw that, I felt a sense of the sublime. I felt I don't know, one of the few things that Pope Francis said that I really liked was God is not a magician. That is, God doesn't have to pull the universe out of a hat. God doesn't have to pull the universe out of the hat. To me, him doing something like creating life through evolution or something like that is a much more sublime and fascinating way of bringing life into existence than just kind of making it whole scale. I don't think this is the exact fish because that one lived in caves. But yeah, it's a type of fish that can climb walls and hang on to walls. It's fascinating, the kind of things that exist in the world. But no, like how evolution works is there's certain pressures on an animal, and the animals, the members of that species who are more adapt to it, the animals who are more able to adapt to it survive, whereas the ones search that live in waterfalls. Okay, somebody is pointing this out to me. Let's see here. No, I don't see the one I'm looking for. It's okay. So let's just to take a small example of microevolution. Let's say there's a species of animal. Let's say it's a snake, and they live in a forest, and some members of the snake are more brown and green, and then other members of the snake are like a neon orange. The neon orange snakes are probably going to get killed because they stick out like a sore thumb, whereas the ones that are more camouflaged are going to survive and reproduce. And this kind of comes back to one of my memes, the whole Chad Downey meme, where a lot of people, a lot of like alt-rightists and a lot of like neo-Nazis have this idea that like we have to like abort all of the people with disabilities because there's a bunch of Chad Downeys who are going to go and reproduce. Something like 95% of males with Down syndrome are infertile to begin with. And even if they weren't infertile, they probably wouldn't reproduce. So, yeah. Another good example of kind of evolution in action is whenever you have a disease, and this is particularly true among insects with pesticides, is the insects that survive are the ones that have a natural resistance to it. And then it doesn't brightly colored mean poison. Okay, well, Mr. Man makes a good point. You get what I'm saying, though, of a non-poisonous species. So, no, it's all part of the same process, and the two things influence each other.
That consequently necessitates such a strategy. It is important to underline that.
I mean, like for instance, with humans, what would happen is if sloths are green. Okay, that was maybe a bad example, but whatever. Yeah.
The following. These two categories are cemented.
Humans have gotten taller over time, in part because of nutrition, in part just because people tend to favor taller people instead of manless.
Set in stone biological categories with no leeway or room for overlap. Sexual reproduction is, after all, how species are differentiated from each other within.
Well, I mean, there's different ways, and this is kind of another interesting point. There's different ways of defining species. Traditionally, I think how it's done is when the closest common ancestor is and how genetically similar different animals are. Whereas I've heard people argue that it should be on a base of taxonomy. That is how similar they are together to each other in terms of role, appearance, that kind of thing. So it's kind of an interesting topic. But I don't know.
In the science of biology, changing from R-type to K-type is impossible, since it would be the equivalent of just randomly turning from one animal species into another.
I mean, like I said, by this logic, the birth rate of countries couldn't change. Basically, what happened was R-type was a lot more beneficial during the agricultural era, because then you'd have a whole bunch of kids to work on your farm. But once we moved into a more urbanized setting, it ceased to be useful to have a whole bunch of children. You wanted a couple children that you could educate in a skilled trade or something like that.
However, looking at this graph must have had a rather seductive allure to our dear friends at the alt-right and far-right. Hey, could it be that this applies to human beings, that we can apply the RK selection theory within the human species? Could it be that the blacks, low IQ individuals, the poor and other social groups are biologically primed to dumping as many children as possible into the world without any nurture due to their inherent nature? Let's go and make up a new word. Let's call it RK psychology, so we can differentiate ourselves from biology and escape the rigorous process of the critical academic inquiry by actual biologists. And maybe we can assign political conviction to our new psychological theory as well. Quote, here in the R strategy.
I mean, like, it's kind of a meme that white people are inherently K-type. I mean, I think white people are better able to switch. Same with Asians. But there was a time period where, like, white people would have, like, a dozen children. They'd have as many children as possible, like, to the same extent that Africans would. But I think they're easier to adapt to K-type.
We see the origins of the liberals' tendencies towards conflict avoidance, from oppositions to free market capitalism to pacifism to demands that all citizens disarm so as to avoid any chance of conflict and competition. And let's assign supposed animal traits within our new psych.
Okay, so that's interesting. Risk aversion, promiscuity, low investments, and or single parenting with lots of kids. Early sexualization of offspring compared to length of life. Well, that is true. Blacks go through puberty a lot earlier. Loyalty to family over the tribe. Interesting. Competition proficiency, pair bonding, high invest. Why is it competition proficiency? Because a lot of K-type animals tend to live in groups. Like elephants live in groups, wolves live in groups, humans live in groups.
Psychological theory. The 5 traits of R-selected animals. Risk aversion, promiscuity, low investment and or single parenting with lots of kids, early sexualization of offspring compared to length of lifespan, and finally, loyalty to family over the tribe. The 5 traits of K-selected animals. Competition proficiency, pair bonding, high investment in fewer offspring with dual parenting, late sexual maturation of offspring, and finally, equal loyalty to the family and the tribe. Can someone explain to me how loyalty to the tribe is, for example, an animal trait? And I cite these claims from 2 sources mainly. The Anonymous Conservative, which is the source used...
Okay, but I don't know, tribe is kind of like goofy. I don't know if animals are really loyal to the family, but they're within the context of there's animals that are social and animals that are antisocial. Like I said, garter snakes are social, whereas something like skinks will kill each other. If you put 2 blue-tongued skinks next to each other,
used
they'll eat
apparently
each
by
other.
Tara McCarthy, Davis Arini and Bill Whittle. The other source is the blog truthjustice.net, an alt-right blog, which seems to be the source of Millennial Woes and Stefan Molyneux. Stefan Molyneux having literally copied the list of supposed animal traits, such as promiscuity. Yet
Kind of like how you copied the stuff that your biologist friends gave you.
he proceeds not to call them animal traits. And from there, the childish and baseless speculations continue to go on. Maybe the welfare state supports R-type people. Political debate might be pointless since it's all biologically inherited. Maybe the refugees and migrants coming to Europe are R-types, and maybe the Europeans accepting them are R-types. Maybe you are an R-type and can aspire to be a K-type like Millennial Woes. Well, why is it that I do not find a single scientific paper on this amazing theory of RK-type evolutionary psychology that the alt-right proclaims to have found, and which supposedly explains political, intellectual and racial differences on an evolutionary basis? Why is it that the only end source I find are the book by Anonymous Conservative and an alt-right blog? Well, because all this talk about...
Because it's an attempt to take something that's unrelated and try to apply it to a new context. It's a theory. It's a hypothesis.
About the application of the RK selection theory within the human species amongst individuals is nothing short of worthless, self-aggrandizing, pathetic, and extraordinarily stupid pseudoscientific gibberish. Why? Sexual reproduction. More precisely, sexual reproductive organs. Sexual reproduction is not merely dependent upon specific sexual behavior, but the developed sexual organs, which consequently make an R or K reproduction strategy a necessity. It is dependent upon the embryonic development
I mean, some things are inherently more RK type. but it's a decision that societies kind of make. Probably a really good example of this is there's often pressures, like I said, with urbanization that people react to. Like in the case of Japan, Japan is one of the few countries I'd say is legitimately overpopulated. So as a result of it being overpopulated, the birth rate has fallen and the country's probably going to go through a period of population decline. That I don't think is necessarily a issue, because probably what will happen in Japan is once its population falls by a couple 10 million and the cost of living becomes somewhat saner, the birth rate will probably start to go back up again. So, because couples can't have more than one child, they invest a ton into that child. I know in Canada, Asians are like the most excessively K children I've ever seen, parents I've ever seen. I've worked at schools a couple times, and the Asian kids are always super well groomed. Their parents always have them enrolled in like after school classes and like violin. And all that kind of, I think they go too far with it. I think they have to kind of let the kids be kids and kind of develop more rounded personalities. But extreme parental involvement, I find, is something that Asians are more predisposed towards.
Process after conception. It is dependent upon very specific behavioral patterns of offspring that are not varying within a species but between species. You can't separate a sexual reproduction strategy from its accompanying sexual organs and the required physiology of the species that has evolved to have either the R or K sexual reproduction strategy. And you cannot separate a species from the sexual reproductive strategy that it has evolved to have.
I mean, some animals that give live birth, like I think chameleons would be an example of this. Some chameleons give live birth, I believe. Have a lot of babies, whereas some animals that lay eggs don't have very many.
Human beings are K-types, not because of some dreamt up nonsensical notion that there is a K-type psychology, no, but because our bodies have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to do so. Our brains have, and most importantly, our sexual organs are developed for this purpose as well. A female human pregnancy on average lasts for 9 months. A female woman's sexual reproductive organs have not evolved to give birth to dozens, let alone...
But lots of women do give birth to dozens of children. That was fairly common during colonial America or most pre-industrial societies. Actually, you know what? We can see this right now. If we look at what's happened is birth rates have fallen dramatically throughout the world. Much of the world is now at sub-replacement birth rate. Let me see here. I'm just trying to find a fertility rate by country. Yeah, so a lot of the world is now at replacement or sub-replacement fertility rate. So like even like we like to think of you can't really see here, but most of Latin America is now at 1 to 3 children. Turkey's very low. China has imploded. Even Africa is rapidly slowing down as these countries industrialize. It's interesting because Erdogan is very, very natalist, one of the most natalist leaders on earth. He said that women who don't have 3 children are traitors to the Turkish nation and are undermining making Turkey a more powerful country. Erdogan is kind of base, TBH.
Hundreds or even thousands of offspring at the end of a single pregnancy. And lest we forget, we can observe that all humans are K-types by the simple fact that if you abandon a newborn human infant and leave it completely to fend for itself alone, it will die. The human biological reproductive process doesn't allow us to simply dump our newborns and expect them to naturally survive on their own. It takes the human infant more than a year to learn to walk.
This kind of reminds me, something very interesting is animals live much, much longer in captivity than they do in that they do in the wild. Like I remember it was at the Tower of London. So there's an interesting story. There's a bunch of ravens that live at the Tower of London, and there's a myth that if every raven was to die or leave the Tower of London, then the monarchy would collapse and Britain would, like, the monarchy would die out. So when the monarchs at the time heard that, they dictated that there always has to be ravens there. So they have, I think it's like 7 to 9 of them. 2 are always kept in cages. And they all have clipped wings, but the ravens, I think it was like live like 30, 40 years compared to like 12 years or 7 years in the wild. Animals in captivity live much, much, much longer.
It takes considerable time and effort of parental nurturing to raise a child into a state where it can take care of itself independently. More important...
But it makes sense, to be honest. Like, a human can kill pretty much anything. Okay, so it takes like 14 years or whatever to mature, but humans can make things like guns or cannons or grenades, and that can kill any other animal fairly easily. So it is a valuable reproductive strategy.
A human infant child needs mother's milk. There's a reason why you find lactating breasts amongst K-type species, because they are an inherent and important part of the K-type sexual reproduction strategy. Everything about the human being's physiology, the way his body has evolved over the course of hundreds of thousands...
I mean, the interesting thing, once again, is that's not necessarily the case. There's, like, cow milk, there's baby formula, etc.
Thousands of years, clearly and without a shadow of a doubt, makes it clear the human being's reproductive...
Clearly and without a shadow of a doubt makes it clear.
Reproductive strategy is K-type. More importantly, to which...
You know what's interesting is there's a species called the Greenland shark that lives like 300 years. Let me look up how long. I think it's 200 to 300 years. They're the longest lived vertebrate that we know of. Okay, Greenland sharks will live 300 to 500 years is how long they will live for, which is fascinating that a vertebrate can live that long.
Which we will get back to later, the K-type sexual reproduction strategy is distinctively mammalian. Compare that to an R-type like the common European trout. Its reproduction happens through the trout swimming upriver to mate. The male does not remain with the female. The pregnancy is very short, with the...
Yes! I think the term is gravid. Let me look. I think the term is gravid for animals that have eggs. I think gravid is the term for if they carry eggs within them. I don't know if... I don't think the term pregnancy is used to refer to... Because I thought it might be used to refer to things like boas. Because boas give live birth, but they have eggs within them, and the eggs hatch inside of them. So I don't think they're technically called pregnant. I did think they were like that, but yeah.
Makes it clear the human being's reproductive strategy is K-type. More importantly, to which we will get back to later, the K-type sexual reproduction strategy is distinctively mammalian. Compare that to an R-type like the common European trout. Its reproduction happens through the trout swimming upriver to mate. The male does not remain with the female. The pregnancy is very short, with the female then laying up to 10,000 eggs that are covered in sand and small stones and then abandoned. Both the female and male return downstream. Several hundred, if not thousands of eggs become prey to other animals. When the small trout hatch, they are extremely vulnerable to other prey animals, however capable of feeding themselves and fending for themselves throughout the process of growing into sexual maturity. The biological reproductive strategy is without a doubt R-type and distinctively not mammalian. For human beings to be R-type in reproductive strategy, they would have to be completely different in physiology and evolved with completely different reproductive behaviors. An R-type female human being would have a womb able to host dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of offspring within a single pregnancy. To both the R-type male and the R-type female human, the concept of a relationship is something that they lack the cognitive ability to even understand, and both would in most likelihood go separate ways right after mating. The R-type female human being would have no breasts, since nurturing offspring would not be necessary. The pregnancy of the R-type female human would only last for 2 weeks, since pregnancies are usually rather short with R-types. The R-type...
Interesting, some sharks can take years. They have a much longer... Some species of sharks have... Oh, wait a minute. Okay, let's look at this. This is the first thing I found on Google. Okay, let's see here. Sharks. Unlike most fish, sharks are K-selected reproducers, meaning they produce a small number of well-developed young, as opposed to a large number of poorly developed young. Let's see here. R-type versus K-type. Interesting.
Female human would be ready to conceive another batch of offspring mere weeks after she laid her eggs. And yes, the R-type human female would most likely lay eggs because giving birth to living young is a rare exception amongst R-type species. The R-type human female would also abandon those eggs after giving birth. And
I know, like garter snakes can give birth to like 30 snakes. There's plenty of animals that give birth to a lot of live young. I mean, have you ever heard the expression breeding like rabbits? Don't dogs and cats give birth of litters of like 6 or 7 at a time?
And the R-type human offspring would hatch capable of walking and fending for themselves entirely by themselves. This within itself should illustrate perfectly well the pure ridiculousness of the idea the alt-right and its associates are proposing here. Because this creature I describe...
But birds are K-type. Like, birds will build nests. If you look at, look at geese. I don't know. If you live in Canada, you see Canadian geese everywhere. And you'll always see at least a couple baby geese. Goslings are like semi-mature geese that haven't completely grown. And they stay with the pack, and the pack cares for them.
Wouldn't even be human. And more importantly, which some of you may have already noticed, it would not even be a mammal anymore. The capacity to give birth to living young is a specifically mammalian trait, with few exceptions, such as the Australian platypus. The platypus lays eggs.
I think it's something like 30% of snakes and like 20% of lizards. Let me see if I can find a skink giving birth. Okay, here we go. Like I said, part of this is just because I like reptiles and I wanted an excuse to talk. Oh, what's that there? It's a blue-tongued skink giving birth to live young. I want a blue-tongued skink. Blue-tongued skinks are awesome. I mean, just look at them. They're so cool. Also, you can feed them like ground turkey and vegetables and stuff. And they're apparently very friendly animals. And they got the cool blue tongue. Actually, a cool thing about blue-tongued skinks is the reason that they think the reason why their tongue is blue is because it's so they don't get it doesn't get sunburned. Yeah. So that's cool. I love blue-tongued skinks. They're adorable.
But also engages in an extensive nurturing process associated with K-type sexual reproduction strategy. The platypus is a K-type mammal, however one that...
I kind of feel like the platypus shouldn't be considered a mammal and they should just call it a bird. Like, I don't really care about what the genetics are. It's bullshit. It shouldn't be a mammal. Sorry, not sorry.
through its isolation in Australia over hundreds of millions of years, is regarded to be a living fossil from a time when mammals still laid eggs. K-type organs that consequently necessitate such organs and the required since the alt-right treats biology like regressive, so and then those eggs are significant step undertaken in the evolution of mammals that differentiates them from other animal classes such as reptiles and fish. 220 million years ago, within the Triassic period, we find the first ancestor of the mammalian species called cynodonts, who were some of the first to give birth to living young and had a consequent long period of nurture. The K-type reproduction strategy is a distinctively mammalian strategy that has...
I wonder if no. Well, haven't they ever watched any kind of like dinosaur documentary? A lot of the herbivores look like they raise their young and they hatch from eggs. Kind of a cool thing about pythons is pythons give birth to eggs, and they're one of the few species of snakes that are endothermic, in which they can use energy to generate heat. And the female python will wrap around the eggs, and she'll generate heat with her body to keep them warm.
Has evolved over the course of 220 million years. And what does the alt-right make of all of this? What do they do with hundreds of millions of years of evolution and clearly defined biological classifications? They strip sexual reproductive strategies of its single most important component, the sexual reproductive organ.
Do any birds give live birth? I'm kind of curious now. Bird live birth. Okay, no bird gives birth to live young. Interesting.
And proclaim that human beings apparently haven't evolved this reproductive strategy over the course of several millions of years, but switch in between R and K type in accordance to a biologically inherited political alignment or skin pigment, as if being liberal or black makes you have sex like a reptile, fish or amphibian. In essence, the alt-right treats biology like regressive social justice morons treat biology as well. They strip it of its class.
Yeah, but some people have like a lot of sex and a lot of children. Some people have fewer children. They're higher quality. Like, this isn't controversial.
Classifications and biological realities, and proclaim that sexual organs are an irrelevance. This is bullshit on a spectacular level. It is sociological determinism masquerading as biological determinism whilst completely ignoring...
Let me see if I can find... There's a clip I want to play for this. Let me just find it. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. So...
Since the alt-right treats biology like regressive social justice morons treat biology as well. They strip it of its classifications and biological realities and proclaim that sexual organs are an irrelevance. This is bullshit on a spectacular level. It is sociological determinism masquerading as biological determinism whilst completely ignoring actual biology.
It's me, Tug.
That's right. Now, Tug who?
Tug who? I don't know. Who are you?
Me? I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
What?
You dudes don't know what dude.
I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
Our sexual reproduction strategy as a species, no, not just as a species, but as a class of animals, as mammals, is biologically determined. We are all K-types. Long pregnancy, giving birth to living young, nurturing our offspring, and our offspring's inability to fend for itself during its infancy, clearly and...
Every animal. Every single animal. Let me see. How long is a shrew's pregnancy? Let's see here. Okay, female shrews have 10 litters a year. Their gestation period is 17 to 32 days, and they can become pregnant within a day or so of giving birth. Shrews live about 12 months. Sounds pretty hard to me.
Without a doubt, underlines that. Deadbeat fathers, multiple sexual partners, and other such decisions made by individual human beings do not change that biological reality. No matter if a person abandons their child with its mother or father, the biological reality is that we as a species, through millions of years of evolution, are meant to care for and nurture our offspring. And yet, Stefan Molyneux, Bill Whittle, Millennial Woes, McCarthy and the rest of the gang proclaim that apparently it is within human biology to simply, at a whim, ignore 220 million years of evolution that shaped our sexual organs and our...
How does Kraut explain variable birth rates? That's kind of what I'm interested about. Like, how does, like, by his logic, shouldn't it just stay at the right, like, the same level for all time? And I don't know.
Consequent sexual reproductive strategies to then go ahead and apparently form a completely new sexual reproductive strategy and to breed like reptiles. All of this is simply laughable. People who do not follow Stefan Molyneux's political line of thought, according to his delusions copied from an alt-right blog, sexually reproduce like reptiles without actually having the reproductive organs of a reptile. Molyneux proclaims in his video that human beings started out as R-types and evolved to be K-types, which is utter nonsense, not only because humans evolved from mammals and hence are K-types.
But they did. I mean, the birth rate went down.
Anyway, but because sexual reproduction is the measurement by which biologists classify species. If humans supposedly started out as...
Okay, but it says multiple ones. Biochemistry, reproduction, distribution, and behavior.
R-typed, which they didn't anyway since they are mammals, and then evolved into K-types, those new K-type humans would no longer be considered to be humans, but a different species, because they have a different strategy of sexual reproduction.
I mean, they would only be a different species if they couldn't reproduce together.
Molyneux builds this entire video viewed by almost 200,000 people on the basis of a falsehood, in essence distorting biology and giving his audience a completely skewed and false image of sexual reproductive strategies and the Darwinian model itself. Most ridiculous of all within all of this has to be Millennial Woes. Besides assigning a sexual reproductive strategy that had...
Millennial Woes, like, is his face on a milk carton now? That dude seems to have just disappeared from the internet. I don't know if he had, like, a breakdown or something like that, or just, like, it got too much for him after in the aftermath of Millennial. But I kind of, like, something that really bothers me is people who just leave the internet and don't say anything to their fans. That's something that, like, I really, really bothers me. Like, if you're gonna leave. That's fine, but don't, like, because there's people who have supported you for years. Like, if I just left one day and I just abandoned all you guys and I didn't give you any explanation, that would be a douchey thing to do. If people have to move on with their lives or their schedule changes or they're worried about getting doxxed or something, that's fine. But I think you owe your viewers, like, a thank you and at least an explanation. That's a big thing I had with Classic Game Room, which I used to really like. But when he left YouTube, he didn't tell anybody he was leaving YouTube. He just left and abandoned it and didn't even tell anybody that he was going to Amazon Prime, and just basically told them to go fuck themselves.
Has evolved over millions of years and which doesn't exist amongst the mammalian species and is more commonly found amongst reptiles and fish, willy-nilly to migrants, refugees and whatever other group of people just comes to his mind, the crown of stupidity must be that he thinks he is an aspiring K-type.
Within these nationalist circles, you get guys who are not naturally K-types. Indeed, I'm one of them. To be honest, but that's another story. I'll talk about specifically a certain type of guy
that's super autistic
who gets involved in nationalism, and well, it's not just one type, but they have this thing in common, which is that they weren't born K-types. They weren't born steady, practical, thinking long term, and so on.
Okay. Oh, let me just move this.
But they, at some point, adopted or tried to adopt it, resolved to develop those qualities.
He believes he can change his mammalian biological sexual reproduction strategy and presumably the sexual reproduction organs that have all evolved over the course of 220 million years by his ancestors through the power of sheer will. Let's put this into reality for him, shall we? Because in essence what he is saying is, hey guys, my girlfriend and I currently sexually reproduce and have the sexual reproduction strategy and all...
Oh, by the way, autistic life update. I'm down to 210 pounds. So I've lost about 30 pounds now. So 10 more to go. And then I've reached my goal weight of 200. So I'm really excited about that. I'm feeling really, well, not mentally good, but I'm feeling physically a lot better now that I've lost a bunch of weight. I think I look a lot better too.
Organs of a fish. And I want to evolve the sexual reproduction strategy and sexual reproduction organs. Oh wait, I think I still have my human sexual reproduction organs because I just ignore the scientific fact that sexual reproduction strategies evolve as a consequence of sexual reproduction organs. But anyway, I want to evolve the sexual reproduction strategy of an elephant within 0 generations. Yes,
But elephants have like the most similar reproductive strategy to humans. They're kind of the same thing almost.
0 generations, since he wants to aspire to, well, evolve within the Darwinian model himself into a completely different biological sexual reproduction strategy. This shit is even more absurd than notions of there being hundreds of different genders.
Oh, thank you, Lelio Firefly. That's very kind of you. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
This is pure nonsense. First off, sexual organs and sexual reproduction strategies can't be separated.
I mean, let me think. Okay, so the main thing I think that really helped me lose weight is I don't drink pop anymore. Or I guess soda for those of you in other countries. I just completely stopped. I don't drink any of it anymore. The only thing I'll drink is iced tea, but I don't really consider that. I stopped that for Lent last year, and I just decided to not go back on it. Because I was drinking too much. I think aspartame is really bad for you. And I think it makes you gain weight, actually. I think it's, like, worse than the sugar, actually. Like, I think it makes you more hungry or something like that. I also switched medications. I think in retrospect, my duloxetine was probably making me hungry. Now that I'm on Prozac, I think really dramatically reduces my appetite. So that's a good thing, but honestly, just not drinking soda anymore, and also not using sweetener in like anything. So like in tea or coffee or whatever. I feel like completely cutting out aspartame. Like if something has it in it, I'm not gonna like throw a fit about it, but I feel like that helped me a lot.
Sexual organs evolved over millions of years and consequently have evolved the required sexual reproductive strategies. Second, sexual reproduction is the criteria by which biologists classify and separate different species. And more importantly here, sexual reproductive strategies differ between animal classes, with K-type reproduction being distinctively mammalian. In essence, changing your sexual reproductive strategy from R-type to K-type or vice versa is to demand to have the sex organs of a completely different species in a completely different animal.
Another kind of, if you want kind of a, I don't know if this is a weight loss tip, but it's kind of a meme that fat makes you fat. Like, the issue with a lot of fats is I call it hydrogenated bullshit. Like, it's like fucking hydrogenated vegetable oil or anything. Like, meat by and large is not bad for you. Meat fat is not really, like, bad. The fat from things like avocados, things like olive oil, these fats are not bad. In a lot of ways, fat is good for you because it's satiating. Like, a steak is a lot more satiating in terms of making you feel full than is a bag of chips. It takes a lot longer to digest, etc. That's one of the reasons they recommend you eating nuts. Because nuts have basically no carbs in it. It's just protein and fat. So I think it's a meme that really hurt nutrition. Because they used to apparently make McDonald's fries and burgers with beef tallow, and then they switched over to hydrogenated bullshit. So, cashews are life. Cashew gang. I love cashews.
A class such as fish or reptiles. Basically, you are asking to change your supposed fish cock or lizard vagina into a
You know what's a really good snack is chunky peanut butter. If you get like the stuff that has like ground peanuts in it, like the rougher stuff, that makes a really good snack food because it's very filling because it's just protein and fat.
mammalian sexual organ. Third,
Thank you,
evolution
River Run says only fat makes you fat.
requires
Actually, what probably makes you the most fat is carbs.
offspring. You want to evolve over the course of 0 generations? That very concept is in complete and utter denial of the theory of evolution itself. You cannot evolve your sex organs and your sexual reproduction strategy yourself into something completely different to consequently turn yourself into what would be a different species. If such a thing were to happen, it would...
I mean, it's like, I get that people's weren't always eating the healthiest, but people were able to eat bread and meat for like thousands of years, and it seemed to like work out okay. The issue with why bread is so bad today is, firstly, we apparently use a different type of wheat called dwarf wheat that matures very quickly than what we used to use. Also, bread is just a lot more refined. One of the kind of an interesting thing is I was always curious, what did people do before modern dentistry? And the answer is people didn't really have that many problems with teeth in the pre-modern era. Because bread was often milled. And to mill bread, you have to use a millstone. And when you mill bread with a millstone, you get a little bit of grit in it. Peanut oil is also not bad for you. But and you chew the bread that has the grit in it, and the grit cleans your teeth. And the flour tended to be a lot coarser. The bread was coarse, and it would clean your teeth. Now, it would weigh your teeth down, but it's better to have worn down teeth that are not rotten, etc. Also, no refined sugar.
Disprove evolution. Third, your sexual reproductive strategy is K-type, because the sexual reproduction strategy of the entire human species is K-type, and because mammals are K-type. You depended on the nurturing of your parents as an infant. That makes you a K-type. You were not capable of sustaining yourself directly after birth. Hence, you are K-type. This entire...
I admit I do drink a lot of sparkling water now. Unsweetened, of course, but I don't know, like Perrier or Select or whatever kind of the local brand is. I like the ones that are flavored. Just the one that... I don't know, not like the artificial. They just have some essential oil or something like that in it. But I find that I've looked it up. Mineral water or like fizzy water is, I think, 1/100th of the damage to your teeth as pop is. So it just gives me something sparkling.
Shtick you are playing here is sociological determinism masquerading as biological determinism. What is happening here is not a group of brave public speakers voyaging where science doesn't dare to go out of fear of social repercussion. This is not a group of pioneers giving us some hidden knowledge. This is not some graciously given red pill. This is a group of people proudly standing on a podium to openly, loudly and proudly proclaim to the world, hey there, I am too dumb to understand sexual reproduction. What lessons do we learn out of all of this? Well, it is not an appeal to authority fallacy to ask a biologist to explain biology. Never, ever presume that you are an expert on matters of natural science because...
Well, no, I mean, it depends what kind of... Like, okay, they're but what kind of maybe they're like a biologist who studies dogs. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, okay, so they're an expert on dogs, but that doesn't mean that they're an expert on people.
You read some shoddy, silly blog. And the more you talk about something you know progressively less about, the more likely you are to make a damned fool out of yourself. This is not an argument, it's biology. RK selection is a clearly defined biological concept, a theory, and I know already that some dim-witted and desperate individuals will claim, hey, we are only using RK selection as a metaphor. To which I can only reply that this just makes you even less scientific.
Why?
Since you can't just merely grab terms with meanings attached to them and reassign a new meaning.
What? No, but it's using it as a heuristic. You're using a metaphor, like any normal part of speech, like double-edged sword. Obviously, a double-edged sword wasn't initially intended to be used as like a metaphor. I don't know, cutting the mustard. In my case, something like mild concern, China economy. Like these are, it's retarded.
RK selection can only be observed between species and not between individuals within a species. That would contradict our fundamental understanding of biology, since it contradicts our understanding of sexual reproduction. If you claim that RK reproduction occurs between individuals within one species, you will have to forward empirical data to prove this, to show us how human beings suddenly...
No, but you can't. Like, okay, I'm gonna, you know what, Kraut, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna prove to you in one image that it does vary. It's let's just take a look at this. Whoa. Holy shit! I just proved it. I just disproved him. Apparently, it does vary from country to country.
Evolved reptilian R-type reproductive strategies, behavior patterns, as well as sexual organs. In the end, I would like to reiterate my sincere gratitude to two people who so graciously sacrificed some of their time over the course of 2 months to educate me. I do not know how to thank one of them here, since she has no social media presence besides the YouTube account with which she is subscribed to me. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your book. The other one, as some of you may have noticed, is the Doktorand, a German YouTuber, one of the leaders of the German science, rational thought, and generally just anti-bullshit YouTube community.
Does Krauts even still have a Patreon? What the fuck? People give this asshole money? Oh, I wish I had that much money being given to me.
Besides also being an accomplished academic and neurologist. 1,000 thanks to you. And I hope that every single one of my German-speaking subscribers will go and subscribe to your channel. In the next video, I will explain why...
Okay, but why isn't her channel in the description? It's not in the description, you asshole.
Race realism itself, as the alt-right argues for on supposed scientific grounds of genetics, is absolute bullshit. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow and share on Twitter, maybe even become a patron, or make a one-time donation via PayPal.
If you guys like this, then please give me money. Give me money and like the video. So I'm sorry if this wasn't the most creative live stream, but I've been watching a lot of like Clint's reptiles and snake discovery lately, and I just kind of wanted to talk about animals for a while. So anyways, I just wanted to say thank you. If you want to support me, do I not have a link to my book? Fuck. Okay, give me a second. Let me just put a link to my book. That is a mess on my part. My book, No Chance, is available in both paperback and Kindle. People ask about an audiobook. The issue with doing an audiobook is it just would be like... It would just be kind of a pain to do. I have a friend who could record it, but getting it listed would be really hard, and that kind of thing. It would just be just a pain. So, let's see. Please check out my book, No Chance, a Postmodern Odyssey. So, Yeah, and there's a link to my Discord below if anyone wants to join in the fun. We have a great Discord. There's no 24-hour ops. There's only 25-hour ops. So, anyways, have a good rest of the week. I'll probably see that new Liam Neeson movie on the weekend, so expect a review of that. That looks like a lot of campy fun. Anyways, love you guys. As always, God